Hi, this is Black Cats Are Bad Luck and So Are You Kid by Holly, Chapter 11. Um, Sleeping Azuku was too good not the frickin' draw. I wasn't originally gonna shade this, but I looked at it and I was like, I wanna fucking shade it. So I shaded it. No background though. That was the compromise I gave myself if I'm shading it. Since if I plan to get four out, I gotta probably keep the artwork a little simple. Anyway, on to the chapter now. Azawa woke up slowly, eyes dry and sticking together. He sat up and yawned, rubbing his eyes. Though when he looked back down, he saw a small black bundle, now rolled into his back in the middle of his pillow, looking awfully disgruntled. The man snorted and pet the boy, who made a small noise of confusion and surprise, meow, turning into contentment. The man sighed and stood up, stretching again and checking his phone. His husband had read his text, but had not messaged him back. He shrugged and put his phone away, trusting his partner. Hopefully, the man had not released the criminal that he had jailed the other day. He put his phone away and walked over to the door, leaving the small boy to rest a little longer. Though, as he walked out of the room, a small tabby blur tried to rush in. The man shut the door to a crack and bent down to lift the small blur into his arms. Now, what are you doing out? The cat looked up at him with large blue eyes that radiated innocence and meowed pathetically. Meow, meow. Carefully trying to wiggle out of his arms and to freedom, he sighed and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind him. The cat relaxed in his arms as his point of interest was closed, and tried to slide out from the man's hold. He sighed and let the cat drop to the ground, who landed not so gracefully on three paws. The man rolled his eyes at the small ball of idiocy and walked to find his husband. The man was on the couch sleeping, like he had been sentenced there by Azawa, though for the jailbreak he and his cat got up to, the man might actually be banished to the couch, at least until Midoriya was normal again. Though, when the man rolled onto his side and grunted in his sleep, the position looking uncomfortable, the man sighed and walked over to him. He knelt down beside the sleeping man and gently shook him awake. Zashi, wake up. The man mumbled and smooshed his face into the cushion below his head. Zawa laughed softly and kissed the man's forehead, which made him wake a little more. The man lifted his head from the cushions below him and slowly blinked at the other. Once he saw the other man, though, a small smile appeared on his face. Hello. Zawa chuckled softly and rested his forehead on the other. Hi. Sorry, didn't mean to fall asleep. It's fine, Zashi. Though you did release a wanted criminal from his prison. I thought he served enough time. Azawa laughed and kissed the other man, who appreciated after a moment. When they pulled back, Azawa brought their foreheads together again, holding the other man's head close with his hand on his back and his other's head. They remained like that for a while, just breathing together, until they were disturbed by a small but distressed meowing coming from the bedroom. Meow! 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 Zawa sighed and sat back, his husband now awake and giggling at the other. I see, he's learned to use his voice. Zashi commented. Zawa sat back on his legs and nodded, grinning slightly. Yep, there's not gonna be any peace. The man in front of him laughed and sat up. Zawa groaned and stood himself, going to free the menace within the other room. I'll start supper then. Zawa nodded and yawned, opening the door to release Izuku from the confines of the dark bedroom. Izuku woke up partly when his teacher moved, making him roll onto the center of the man's pillow. He grumbled as the movement was quick and spooked him. Scrunching his face and cracking an eye open to glare at the man who had moved. Though the bastard just laughed, and Izuku flicked his tail angrily. Though the man moved closer and pet him, and all was well again. Izuku closed his eyes. The man's offense was forgiven, and went back to sleep, barely hearing the man and leave the room, or the struggle that occurred. A while later, he woke again, still in a dark room, but now alone. His fur was sticking up in different directions. It was very uncomfortable. So he groaned and sat up, fixing his fur. It still felt odd, but comforting. Once his cat brain was satisfied, he jumped off the bed and began walk towards the door, only to find it closed and locked. So he did the only rational thing he could think of. He sat by the door and began to meow. Meow! 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 Letting the others know he was awake. He heard some laughing and hushed whispers before he heard the now familiar footsteps of his homeroom teacher approaching the door. He stepped back as the man opened it and walked through, the man looking down at him and sighing, shaking his head almost fondly. But then there was a thumping coming towards him, and when he looked over, he was barreled into by a white blur, and the door behind him was slammed shut. The thing above him hissed and jumped off him, running at the door. Zuko sat there and blinked a few times, surprised. The man picked the white ball of anger up and carried him to the bathroom. Panicked steps rushing into the hall as his homeroom teacher threw the other cat into the bathroom and shut the door. The man stood panting, looking at the mess before him. Izuku was on his back, looking up at him with wide, confused eyes, and the other man standing at the bathroom door grumbled about the dumbass cat under his breath. The raven-haired walked over and picked Zuko up, holding him. The man walked over towards the other, who made way for the other. The man stopped beside the other, and the blonde tilted his head at the other. What happened? Are you both okay? The other man sighed and nodded. The criminal tried to get in the room when I tried to release the child and ran over him. Zuko hadn't moved though the entire thing. Though now he moved to right himself, as he was still on his back, being moved around by the man holding him. And it was getting quite uncomfortable, so he wiggled and righted himself, the two above him still talking, though his teacher subconsciously making sure the boy did fall from his arms, as he continued to wiggle around and right himself. Once he was righted, the man pat his back and began to walk towards the kitchen, the blonde following behind. His teacher set him onto the counter and sat down on a bar stool, while the other walked back towards the microwave, pulling out a plate with some noodles on it and setting it in front of the raven-haired man. Your food? The other man smiled softly and took the plate from the other man, setting it in front of him and looking back at the other man. Izuku stiffened, not quite wanting to see the admittedly sweet thing they were about to do. Still felt like an invasion of privacy. Thanks, Zashi. The blonde smiled and leaned down to kiss the other's forehead, which Izuku quickly looked away for until he was addressed again. All right, Izuku, ready to eat? Zuko perked up, and his head swiveled over to look at the man, who began to laugh and walk towards the fridge to get his food. Zuko walked towards the edge of the counter, waving his tail in the air happily, and pacing the edge until his laughing teacher brought over some fancy-ass cat food and set it in front of him. It had ham, some broth, and other stuff. It didn't look or smell like cat food. So Izuku hungrily dug in, both his teachers breathing similar sighs of relief. I'm sorry. I Okay, throughout this entire chapter, I'm like trying not to laugh. It's really hard sometimes not to laugh when reading this fic because it's really funny and I love it. Like I think I said at the beginning of this episode, I don't know. This is the third episode recorded today, and I'm kind of forgetting what I've said and what I've not said. But I love Holly's work. It's so good, and Crack is Crack is hilarious to me. I Okay, speaking is starting to die though. Anyway, that's it for this chapter. So, bye!